Good morning and welcome to Patterson Farms. My name is Linda Neal and I've worked here at Patterson's for 28 years now, so I've seen a lot of changes. Before we start going into the sugar house, I'd like to give you a little idea of what the family is here. In the early 1920s, Grandma and Grandpa Patterson, and that would be Orrin and Mabel Patterson, started here on the farm. They had a little dairy of cattle. They tapped a few sugar bushes up on top of the hill and made a little bit of syrup. And how they made their syrup was they used wooden buckets and wooden spiles. They tapped their trees with a hand auger, brought their sap down to their backyard with a horse-drawn sleigh and the sap, and they boiled outside on a flat pan. When they passed the farm down to Clifton and Alberta Patterson, they changed a little bit. They built a sugar house, they got a wood-fired evaporator, put in 2,600 buckets that Richard and Robert and Mary Lee had to dump twice a day. When it passed down to Richard, that's when it really changed. We got into tubing and a lot more taps. We got up to 87,000 taps and 26 different sugar bushes. We got a new evaporator. We built a larger sugar house, got into an RO, which helped us out an awful lot with as many taps as we have. And now we're down to our 5th generation, Terry and Terry Patterson. So we're changing every day. I've been very lucky to work with 3 out of the 5 generations. The history of maple. Our seasons run anywhere from the end of January into April. We need freezing nights, warmed up days to about 41 degrees, and a westerly wind. And if you don't have that 3 combination, sap doesn't run very well. There's 143 different species of maple. Now in our area here we have red, silver, black swamp, striped, but the best tree to make your syrup from is the American sugar maple, and that's what we basically tap here. Trees have to be 30 years old before we tap them, and about 10 inches in diameter. We'll put 1 tap in the tree. As the trees grow larger and larger, we may put 2 or 3 taps in the tree. But here at Patterson's, that's as far as we go. It doesn't hurt your trees to be tapped every single year. Mother Nature knows when to turn the sap off when it's ready for the leaves to come out. And if you look at this crosscut here of a sugar maple tree, you can see the old tap holes. This shows you that it does not hurt your trees to be tapped every year, putting a new hole in the tree. It just grows right on over. This tree was 143 years old when it had to come down after a storm, and it was giving sap at about 30 years, and it was still giving sap when it was cut down. When sap comes from a sugar maple tree, it's clear like water, about 2% sugar, and at 2% sugar, it takes 43.7 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So we need a lot of sap to make a lot of syrup. Now you say, with so many different kinds of maple trees, how do you tell a sugar maple? Well, the way I do it, because it's the easiest way, I look at the leaves. And on a sugar maple leaf, it has 5 points to it. No other maple tree does. When there's no leaves on the trees, you can look at the twigs. And on a sugar maple twig, it grows in V shapes. No other maple tree does. Now, when our guys get really good at it, all they have to do is look at the outside bark. It has a very distinctive look and feel to it. Now, the first people who made maple syrup were the Indians. And how they did it was they took a tomahawk or a hatchet, and they would put a great big slice in the tree, put a piece of bark under that slice, and the sap would run down and into their birch buckets, which they pitched on the inside to carry their sap back to either their teepees or their sugar camps out in the woods. And how they boiled is they had a hollowed out log, and they would put their sap in the hollowed out log, heat rocks up, drop the rocks into the sap, and that's how they made their sugar. And they kept it in sugar blocks, just like this. This is how they kept their syrup. Now, if they wanted syrup, they would just scratch a little off, add water back to it, and it would become syrup again. Now to tell whether it's sugaring season, we normally look at a calendar. And we know that about the end of January, it's time to get ready, start tapping your trees and getting ready for the next sugaring season. The Indians didn't have that. And how they could tell that it was sugaring season is by the moon phases. Now, in a year, there's always 13 full moons. And it was the third full moon of the season that they knew was a sugar moon, and that's when they usually started making their maple syrup. Third full moon in this year was around the 22nd of March, and that's when they would have started to make their syrup. How they got their calendar is by looking at the turtle. And on the turtle's shell, there's always 13 cylinders on the top of the shell. That was their 13 full moons. And the little cylinders on the outside of the turtle's shell is always 28, and that was the 28 days in between each full moon. Now, when the Indians taught the colonists to do it, that's where it changed a little bit. They used a hand auger, where the hole in the tree started from, and wooden spiles. Now, they made these wooden spiles out of sumac or elderberry bushes because they have a pithy inside. They would drill the inside out, whittle down one end, that end would go into the tree, and the sap would flow down and into their wooden buckets. They would boil their sap in big black iron kettles. And as they got thicker and thicker, they would go from one kettle to another. And at the end, they made sugar blocks just like the Indians did and kept them in little muslin bags. Kept them in their root cellar or their attics where it was cool. And if anybody's ever read the Little House on the Prairie books, Laura's mother asked her to go to the root cellar and bring up a brick of sugar. And this is what they were talking about, was maple sugar. Richard's grandfolks also used the wooden buckets and the wooden spiles. They had snowshoes that they used to go out in the woods to do their tapping, and their lanterns to bring down. Over on this wall, we have one of the older sap haulers, which was drawn by a horse, and there's little screens on the top, and they would pour their sap in. That would keep the twigs and the leaves out of it, and the horse would bring it down, and they would boil from that. When Richard's folks took over, they went to the metal buckets and the metal spiles. These spiles were made out of tin and cast iron, and you can see how big these and the wooden spiles are. So it took a pretty big hole in the tree. Took the tree about 2 years to heel over, or belly button over is what we call it. We also had very heavy tappers that we would have to carry out, plus a jug of gas, and do our tapping with those. Now, when people think of maple syrup, they often think of Vermont. Well, I'm here to tell you Vermont's not the only state that makes maple syrup. If you look at my map up here, I have all the states that make maple syrup, and they make enough to be in the United States stat books. They go as far north as Minnesota and Iowa, and as far south as Tennessee. Now, all the states use different maple trees. All maple trees give sap. They all make syrup, but it is going to taste a little different. So each state that you visit and you try their maple syrup, it will taste a little different. Different soil, different growing season, and different trees do the different grades or their different taste of syrup. We are now using our lighter battery-operated tappers. We also have tubing instead of buckets. And you might have seen some of this tubing as you came up Gurney Road this morning. Now, the light blue tubing we string tree to tree. It then runs into a larger line, which we call our main lines. The main lines then run into big catch tanks that we have at every sugar bush. Now, what a sugar bush is, just a group of maple trees in different areas. Some of them are large bushes, some of them are very small. Depends on how many trees are in that area. The big main lines then run into big catch tanks, and that's where we pick up our sap with our trucks when they go around and pick it up. We also use a different kind of spile. This is called a health tree spile. It's only 5/16. It gives us just as much sap as the larger taps do, and it only takes our trees about 6 months to heal over instead of 2 years. So each generation learned a little bit better how to take care of their trees. From their Indians putting great big slices in the tree and leaving scars, down to the new health tree spiles that we use today. Now, tubing isn't a new concept. In the early 1800s, Canada made metal tubing and spiles, and which they hooked together. They had miles and miles of this. And they would put it all together, tap their trees, but it didn't work very well, because once the sap started to flow into the metal tubing and it froze at night like it was supposed to, it popped apart. The metal, with the plastic tubing that we use, it contracts and goes back to its original size. These are some of the antiques that we've gathered around our area. This is an old sugar log. Now, what our families did around this area, we were about the last ones that had TV and telephone. And so we would gather our friends and family, relatives at somebody's house on a Friday night. They'd get a gallon of syrup out, boil it down, throw it in the sugar log, and start to stir. And they would get out some popcorn, pop it, get out their grape juice that they had canned the year before. And as they stirred that hot syrup, it got thicker and thicker and granulated into sugar. And they would dip their popcorn in it, drink their grape juice, do a little gossiping, and just have wonderful fellowship. They also put their syrup, when they made their syrup, into these tins. They had little tags on it that had their name and their address. They would take it down to either the general store here in Sabensville, and they would barter their syrup off for either their next year's seeds for their crops and shoes for the kids. We also had a train depot, and they would take their syrup down in their tins, gather everybody's syrup up, put it on the train depot, and it was taken to New York City to be sold. This is an old sap tin that we had, that we found, and what this is an old oil tin. After the war, when it came back, they didn't have any use for it. So what they did was clean them out, put a little hole in the back of it, put a tap through, and they hung them on their trees, and this is what they gathered their sap in. What I've told you about is that we need freezing nights, warmed up days to about 41 degrees, and a westerly wind. Sap is clear like water, about 2% sugar, and it takes 43 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. I think what we'll do now is we'll go out and we'll tap a tree. All right, we're gonna take you out now and we're gonna tap a tree for you the way we used to do it. Terry's gonna take a drill bit, it's 5/16. We're gonna drill a hole in the tree and put our tap in. Go ahead. As we drill that hole, it's going to be at an angle so that the sap can flow down.
There you go.
There, and the sap is starting to flow already. Now we're using a wooden mallet because we don't want to hit it too hard. We just want to get it enough in the tree where it's tight and not dripping on the outside. There we go. And you can see that it's dripping right out of the little spout. It's really dripping today. The bucket will hang. And you can hear it dripping in the bucket. Next, we'll put a little tent top on it so that it keeps the twigs and the leaves hopefully out of it.
And the rainwater.
Now hopefully I'll be dumping this bucket this afternoon. Not a whole lot, but at least I can say I dumped the bucket today. right, now we've showed you how to tap a tree with a bucket. This is how we do it today. We have all of our sap lines all up now. We keep our lines up all year long. And this is one of our largest sugar bushes we have, about 12,000 taps now here. All the main lines are running down the creek area, down to the bottom where our tank is. All of the trees here are tapped and run down into our big main lines. Right here you can see some of the old tap poles that are starting to close up now, and some of our older trees. Now Terry Patterson now is going to give you a little bit more idea on how these lines do really work.
Good morning. When we drill that hole in a tree, it comes out of that tree one drop at a time, same as you saw in that bucket. That'll run down these tubes, and each tree collectively runs into the main line as they get larger and run to the tank. Our main lines are suspended on high tensile wires, so they're graded so that they drain. Nothing sets in that line. And at the end of the season, the taps are all pulled, and then they come back around and are plugged off so that the system's sealed and nothing gets into that. And then the hole on the tree, the tap hole, will heal up and keeps anything from getting into that.
The 14 guys that we have come in and do our tapping every year for us, we now have 70,000 taps instead of the 86. It takes them about 2.5 weeks to get everything tapped and repaired and ready to go. So they do start in January, and then by February 1st or so, we're ready to go. All right, now we had a freeze last night and we've got some sunshine coming out, so today should be a good sap day for us. And it's probably about 11 o'clock right now, and the sun's been out for a while and it is starting to thaw. And you can see some of the air bubbles in this light blue line. As it starts to thaw, it's going to start running down the channel from each tree. The small line, it keeps running, going around another tree here, down to the bottom of this ravine and into our larger lines. And this is going to get faster and faster. And as it warms up, it's really going to start running. Once it gets down to the main lines, then it's going to be carried down to our sap house. It's at the bottom where our tanks sit. All right, now our trees have been tapped. The sap is coming down. It's coming down through those big main lines. Now the 3 light blue lines are what the sap comes down through. The black line is our air line. Now we need that for a vacuum system. It's an enclosed system, so everything is airtight. When the pumps are turned on, the sap is brought down through those larger main lines and into our sap house, where it comes into a releaser first, and then pumped into our tanks that holds the sap for us. These 2 tanks are 4,000 gallons that'll help us out. And when they get full, we know to come over and pick it up with one of our tankers. Now the vacuum is just to keep our lines free of sap. It does not suck the sap out of the trees. It just keeps our lines clean so it doesn't freeze at nighttime. You are going to have that certain freeze and some of it. That's why you need a little sun in the morning, get everything thawed up and ready to go and start to run. Now what Terry is doing right now, he's hooking up our tank. We're going to be taking the sap out of the tanks and loading it into our tanker truck here to take back to the sugar house. We're also going to take a sample of the sap to see what the sugar content is. Oh, is that my sample? Okay. We like to keep a track on how much sugar content is in our sap when it comes from each one of our sugar bushes. So the boys, when they come and pick up our sap at the tanks, will take a sample for me and try it out and see what the sugar content is. A little more. Thank you. Okay, this sugar bush is running 1.8 sugar content, which is pretty good for this time of the season. So we're going to write it down on our clipboard. And what we're putting on our clipboard today is how much sap comes from this sugar bush, how much they're loading up on our tanker, and also we're going to write down what the sugar content is today.
You want your vacuum?
Yep. Also, we take a vacuum reading, and that way it can tell me if the vacuum is down, then I know there's a problem here at the sugar bush, and we can send one of our crews over to look, find out what the problem is.
Yeah, 27 inches.
There's 27 inches of vacuum, so that tells me that things are working pretty well here. All right, now our guys have come back with the trucks, and they're going to take it up to a dump station that we have by the barn. They're going to dump their load down, and it's gravity fed down here to these 4 tanks, which holds our sap. When it comes down through the tubing, it'll go through some sap socks that we have, and it takes out all the little grubbies that's gotten into the sap before it gets here. Now, once we get these tanks full of sap, and this is raw sap, straight from the tree, it is then going to be pumped down to the next room, which holds our reverse osmosis machine, and that's where we're going to go next. But these 2 tanks that are here, this holds the extra water that we have taken out of the sap before we start to boil. So we wanted to show you this before we went down to the RO room. And you see this water is crystal clear, and this is sap tree water. Now there is no sugar content. This is an inert water. There's nothing in it whatsoever. Now we keep this and use it to clean our machines with. Since there isn't anything in it, it is quite safe, and we can take it and rinse our evaporator and clean it and get it ready for the next day. We also wash our reverse osmosis with this clean water too. So everything that we get from the tree through the sap is used for something. Nothing's ever wasted. Once we get finished with this tree water that we have, our drains all go back out into our fields. So we do recycle the tree water back into nature again. Okay, now we're ready for the next step. Once we have enough sap up in our tanks, it's gravity fed back down here to this first room that holds a reverse osmosis machine. Now what this machine does, it's taking some of the water out of the raw sap before we even start to boil, and it makes a concentrate. The fresh water that we take out of the sap is pumped back up to those first 2 tanks that we saw, where we'll hold it, and we use that to clean our machines and our RO because it is an inert water. There is nothing in it. No salts, no sugars, no nothing. So it's safe to use for cleaning on our stainless steel machines. Once the sap goes through the RO and it becomes a concentrate, it's pumped upstairs to a cold room that we have 2 1,350-gallon tanks that holds our concentrate. I need 1,500 gallons of concentrate just to start the evaporator. Now how this works is that when the sap comes back down, it goes through what we call membranes at high pressure. and that's what separates the waters and the sugars. And then they are pumped out in 2 different pipes. Now, we were up in the woods earlier and we were talking about how much tubing and the taps and things. Since we don't have the help like we used to, we got a monitoring system that monitors our woods. Right here is one of our sensors that we have in the woods. And what that can tell us is if our pumps are running, if the vacuum is good, and if it isn't, then I know that I can send a few guys out there to find the problem. And instead of looking all over the woods, it measures it down to a specific part of the woods so that they can go straight there instead of wandering around looking for a problem. We also have tank sensors. The tank sensors are in every tank at every sugar bush. Now this can tell us how much sap is in the tank. So when I send my guys out in the tankers to pick up sap, I can send them to a tank that's full and not one that's empty. And we have a monitoring system on one of the computers that will show you that, and we'll see that a little later. And it's kind of neat watching it, you know, going from when I started, that we had to check every tank every morning, turn on the pumps. We have to make sure that they're not frozen and unfreeze them. And here now, all I have to do is look at a computer. It's just awesome. Now, all we have to do is look at that. We can turn it on, we can turn it off. The new system that we have, this is a new RO system that we just got this last year. It's brand new, first season coming in. And it took the place of 2 ROs that we had sitting in this room. Now it does the same thing. It does 7,000 gallons of sap per hour, and it can concentrate down to 22 to 24%. But this one can be monitored and started and run by your telephone. And this really helps our main guy out here, Todd Swimley. He kind of runs this portion of the sugar house. He does the boiling, he runs the RO, he makes sure everything is working the way it's supposed to. And if he's out on a problem that he can't get away from, and I have sap up in my tanks, it's got to be start. He can start it from wherever he is by his phone. It'll start that RO, and it'll start ROing the sap and getting it ready, so by the time that he gets back here to the sugar house, he can start to boil. So it really has helped us out an awful lot. We're down to a skeleton crew right now, and all these little things, these little high-tech things, really do help us out for as big as the sugar house we are. All right, now that we have enough concentrate, we're ready to start the evaporator. Now, I also told you that we use our RO water to clean our machines. We can always use the distilled water that comes off our evaporator to clean our barrels. We'll rinse them out, and then they get ready so we can put more syrup in our barrels. Now, once the concentrate's ready, it's pumped from upstairs down to the back top of the evaporator, where it runs through stainless steel tubing, and it's preheated. It then drops to the back pan where it starts to boil. Now, as sap starts to boil, it's going to start changing. It gets heavier because you're boiling more water away from the sugar, and it starts to change in color from clear that comes from the tree to a nice medium amber that we hope is going to come out at our finishing pans. Now, as the sap starts to get heavier, it's pushed toward the front of the evaporator. Now, as it gets down here to our finishing pans, syrup is just about ready to come off. Now, when it becomes syrup, it's at 67%. And that's when it becomes syrup. Now, we also do that by temperature. Syrup comes off at about 218 degrees or 7.5 degrees above the boiling point of water. Water boils here at the farm about 210 degrees. But we will check that, because if your weather changes during the day, so will the temperature of your syrup that you're going to draw it off in. Now, when Richard's grand folks boiled outside on a flat pan to see if their syrup was ready, they would use a scoop. They would scoop it down into the syrup and hold it up. if it's sheeted or curtained or slid off like a piece of ice, they knew their syrup was ready and they'd draw it off, take it into their house and can it up in mason jars. When Richard's folks used a wood-fired evaporator, they changed a little bit. They used a hydrometer. Now what this does, it checks the density of your syrup. Syrup has to be heavy enough so it doesn't vinegar on you. And you have to remember too, that if syrup is boiled correctly down to 67% sugar, it's never going to go bad on you. If you get a little piece of mold on the top, which we call mother, just take it off. It's a natural sealer. Put it back into your refrigerator. If it gets a taste or a smell to the syrup, take it out of that container, bring it to a boil, and put it back into a clean container. It goes right back to syrup. Now, my mom had inherited a farm next door to ours, and I have 3 brothers, and she sent us kids down to the lady's root cellar to clean it up. Well, we went down there and found 6 green pop bottles that she had corked and paraffined. And being kids, we thought, this old lady's been making some elderberry wine, and we're gonna pop one of these babies open and drink it. Well, lo and behold, it wasn't the elderberry wine us kids thought it was gonna be. It was maple syrup. The only thing that was wrong with it, smelled a little musty from being in a root cellar. And other than that, it was fine. And we know that maple syrup was over 75 years old. So if it is boiled correctly and put in a nice container, kept where it's cool and dark, that syrup will stay good for you for forever. Now we have 4 bottles left. My brothers and I are going to get together in about 7 years and open another one, and that syrup is going to be over 100 years old. We now have an automatic draw-off that helps us out on our evaporator. Once that temperature is hit down here in our finishing pans, it's going to be automatically drawn off for us and into this tank. When it goes into this tank, we're going to add diatomaceous earth to the syrup. Now, why we do that is we want to take the sugar sand or niter out of the syrup. That's that brown grit that you used to find in your old tins and jugs of maple syrup. It's something that the tree produces naturally. It doesn't hurt you to eat it or drink it, but because we put a lot of our syrup in glass bottles, we want it to be crystal clear. This is the only way that you can take that sugar sand out of the syrup, is by putting the diatomaceous earth in and running it through a filter press. Now this is syrup that we have gotten before it goes through the filter press. And you can see it's kind of hazy. Now once the syrup goes through this filter press, it's then pumped in to our barrel. Now when that syrup is pumped into this barrel, it's still very, very hot. And once they put the top on it or the bung and it cools down, it acts just like a canning jar, and it'll keep that syrup good for a long, long time. We keep ours in the barrels, and then when we're ready to can it in smaller containers or make a product with it, we know what's going on. Every barrel is numbered, dated, and graded on a sticker. So this tells us when we made it, what grade it is, and how it tastes. So that when I'm making a product, I can go and pick out each one I want. In the beginning of your season, you normally get a very light, fancy syrup that doesn't have much of a mapley flavor, but it's very sweet. We keep that and don't jug it up, and we use it to make candy and maple cream with. As the seasons progress, it gets darker and darker and more mapley flavored. Your next grade is going to be a medium, or what they call rich now, and a little darker. Later in the season, it's going to be called a dark or robust. As you're getting to your end of the season, you have a very dark, very strong syrup that still has a very good taste. And we'll barrel all of those up and keep them to make our products and to can. At the end of the season, as long as we can keep that sap boiling in the pans and not get all wild and boiled over, we'll make what they call commercial grade syrup. Now that stuff is nasty. It's black, stringy, and it stinks when they're boiling it in here, but we'll barrel that up, ship it out on the bulk market. They use it for sweetening tobacco, making maple ice cream, and extracts. So everything that we get from the maple sap is used for something. Nothing's ever wasted. Once our barrels are numbered and graded and ready to go, we'll take them over to the other building where they are kept during the year, and we can go over and pick whichever one we want out. Each barrel gets a sample that we're going to grade a little later and see what the grade or the color is. You can see the difference. This is syrup that is just taken right off the evaporator and how cloudy it is. And this is syrup that has gone through the press. Everything is taken out, all the little grubbies, the diatomaceous earth, everything, and it's crystal clear. Okay, this barrel has been filled and the tops have been putting on, and now we're going to weigh it. We date it, weigh it, and then we're going to take it in and grade the color on it. Now we already have the tare weight on this scale so that they can leave it right on the little buggy there. It's going to be 669 pounds. And the tare weight on the barrel 59. So it's going to be a net weight of 610 pounds. We also have our name, address, and our FDA number and PDA number on these, so if we sell it out on the bulk market, they know where this syrup is coming from. Now we've also made a sample of this drum, so when I go to need one for canning or a product, I can get this number and this sample, and it will match. Now we do a lot of stats here. We're writing down everything that we get from all the sap from our sugar bushes, how many gallons comes from every sugar bush, sugar content. Then when it gets in here and we're making it into syrup, then we're keeping tabs on how much syrup we make for the day, what the grade is, so that we have stats on everything and every step that we make here at the sugar house. All right, and I told you that when we get done with the barrels, we're going to grade the syrup that's in it. And how we do that is, well, when Richard was doing it a few years ago, we had a little color code kit that we used, and we would take a sample of the barrel and put it in with the rest of these, and we were supposed to match them up, and that would give our color code, whether it is a light, a medium, a dark, or a B. And that was the old flavors that they used to have. But not everybody's eyes are the same, and we used to have some really colorful discussions in here on whether it was going to be a medium or a dark. Now we have another machine that helps us out with this, and it's called a light transmittance machine. Now what this is going to do is we take a sample of the syrup, put it in a little vial, and it goes into this machine, and it shoots a light through it, and it gives us a number back. And what that number is exact of what grade it's going to be, whether it is a delicate, a rich, robust, or very dark, very strong. And so there's no question about what you're buying in your jugs. So what we're going to do is we're going to calibrate the machine first, and we use a vial of glycerin. And while that's calibrating, we're also going to check the density of the syrup to make sure that it is heavy enough. And we're going to do that with distilled water. Okay, this one is ready. So we're going to check and grade our syrup that you just saw going in the barrel. We're going to read it. Okay, that reading is 57.3, and I'm going to match it up with the tech colors, and a 57.3 is going to make it into the rich grade, which used to be our medium. And it gave us, I can do a rich color is anywhere from 50.0 to 74.9. So I know that's going to be the grade of rich. Now we're going to check the density of the syrup to make sure it's heavy enough. I'll pour a little in here. Now the way we calibrated this machine is we used distilled water and set it back to 0. So we're going to read this one. Now we want it to be about 66.7. This one came at 66.3. It's going to be barrel number 284. So all of these stats, this will tell me how much syrup I have in every grade and how many total gallons I have when we get finished here. Now after we get the density, we're going to use our RO water that we use to clean our other machines, and we're going to clean this. So each time we use it, it is going to be clean. There's not going to be any sugar content on it, anything else on it, so that we get a true reading. Everything is noted, and then each year I can go back and see what we did the year before that or the year before that. I've been keeping records now for about 20 years. So we can go back and tell you on any certain year how much sap we got, if we had a good season, and how much syrup that we made. Last year we had a pretty good season. We made 19,000 gallons of syrup. Year before that we made 22,000 gallons. So hopefully this year Mother Nature will be pretty good to us and we'll make some good syrup this year too. So far it looks pretty good. This is some of the syrup that we made yesterday that has to be graded and put on the barrel. All right, now we're going to our products that we can make with maple syrup, because syrup's not just for breakfast anymore. When we first take our syrup out, we're starting out making our 3 basic products from syrup. And all this is taking syrup, boiling a little bit more water away from the syrup, and either stirring it fast or slow or cooling it fast or slow. And those 3 combinations makes our 3 basic products. The first thing that we can make is maple cream. And what that is we're taking maple syrup, we're boiling it down a little bit further, we cool it very fast, and then we whip it. And all it is a thick spread of maple syrup. And it has a creamy texture, and it's very light. You can use it on fruit, on biscuits, your pancakes, or like me, I eat it right out of the jar with a spoon. The next item you can make by taking syrup, boiling it a little bit further than cream, and you have maple candy. And we'll take that, boil that down, let it cool slowly. We put it in our candy machine with an auger, and it slowly turns, and then we can put it into some of our molds that we have. These we made into little maple leaves. Maple syrup has very high energy with it, and it's an energy boost that you can take when you're kind of low in the afternoon. If you just pop one of these babies in your mouth, you'll get that little burst of energy that you need to get going for the rest of the afternoon. Now, if you take that syrup and boil it down just even a little bit further than your candy, you're going to get what we call maple granulated sugar. And how we boil this down, we boil it almost as far as it will go. We then put it in this machine, and it starts to slow, and we put it in very, and as it starts to stir, it's stirring slowly. And as that hot syrup cools, it's going to get thicker and thicker, almost like peanut butter, and then it just granulates right into sugar. We're going to take that, and then we're going to sift it. We'll sift it with a large sifter, which is this machine right here, and it takes out the big clumps. And then we're going to take our smaller sifter, and we sift it again to get that nice, fine, granulated sugar. What we have left over is another product, which we call maple crunchies. Now what that is this is what's left over after we sift it. It's bigger pieces of sugar. It's very hard. So you can use that for making cookies, muffins, putting on top of ice cream. Now the maple sugar you can use just like you use white or brown sugar, and you only use half as much. Diabetics can use it because it has a very low glycemic index. They still have to watch it because it is a natural sugar, but it tends to make the readings slowly rise instead of spiking like white sugar does. Now, if we take that syrup and boil it just a little bit further, then we're going to get those sugar blocks that we talked about that the Indians used to make. Hikers and campers can use this. It's very compact, but yet it gives you your syrup if you want it. Just add a little bit of water to it, or you can use it like sugar or candy. Smash it with a hammer. But then you can take those three basic products and you can go out and make what we call extra value products. And this is just about anything. Sugar can be used instead of white or brown sugar. Syrup can be used instead of sugars. And you can make extra value products like our barbecue sauce, maple salad dressing, maple dipping mustard. We cover nuts. We cover popcorn. We have even rock candy that we make that the kids love. And best of all, we make maple cotton candy. Now that one does have a little bit of extra white sugar in it. That's just to keep our machine from coming up. But boy, that's the favorite of everybody, whether you're 5 years old or 85 years old. Everybody has to have the maple cotton candy. This is one of our stoves that we use. Now this is where we do all of our granulated sugar is in this kitchen alone. It gets kind of messy, so this is why we do it in a small space. And we'll fill all these big pots up with our syrup and get them all going and be taking one right after the other. You don't have to wait in between each batch. You can just, as many pots as you have boiling, you can make your sugar with. Now with all of the canning that we do in, like our plastic jugs, we have the little tins, we do it in glass. When they do our large orders in plastic jugs, they do it over in another kitchen where they have big canners. But I still like to use my little 12-gallon canner that I have here. I can keep the temperature going, which needs to be about 160 to 180 degrees to recan. if I'm doing, this is where I do mostly glass. So the glass has to be heated so it keeps the temperature of the syrup up. And that syrup will be anywhere, like I said, from 160 to 180. And that will make sure that when I put the tops on and you lay them down, the tops will seal. And that'll keep that syrup good for you too. So, and this is what we used to use when I first started here. We did all of our gallon jugs and our half gallons on this little tiny canner. Now we've got a nice big one that we can put 2 or 3 barrels of syrup in, get that heated up, and just can all we want to, all afternoon if we want to. But I kind of have a soft heart for this one because this is what I started out on. All right, and we're just about at the end of the tour now, and I wanted to bring you into our little store. Now, as we have grown so large, it's not just a seasonal business for us anymore. We are open all year long. We make our products about every 3 weeks to keep everything nice and fresh. We give tours all year, not just during leaf season or sugaring season. We can give you a tour about any time. We have everything that we make on sale here in the little store at the farm at 119 Patterson Road in Westfield, outside the little town of Sabinsville. We have our plastic jugs with all 3 grades of syrup, from medium to robust to very dark, very strong. We have all of our extra value products, our basic products, our cream, our candy, sugar. Now, we talk about all the high-tech equipment that we have in the sugar house and the sugar bushes, but we've also had to change here in the sugar house and the office from doing books and invoices and things by hand like I used to. Now we're into computers and portable credit card machines and websites. Things I'm trying to get used to, but it's kind of hard. But the young kids are doing really, really good here, and they know all of that. So it's a lot easier for them to take over the office and the running of the store. And I kind of just sit back and let them do it. But we'd like to thank everyone for coming to Patterson Farms today and letting me share what I love the most. And that is making maple syrup and being here at Patterson Farms.